morning, guys. It is Easter Monday and it is raining, of course. It's actually rained quite a lot in the night. I don't think I realised it was going to rain so much, but it has rained a lot. And, like, the water butt down here is like absolutely overflowing. So it's a wet one, yeah. I mean, if you're going to have a wet day over the Easter bank holiday, the Monday is the best one to have it because, you know, hopefully you've got chocolate and you can snuggle up inside and watch something on the TV and just chill. Fingers crossed anyway. I have actually got a really easy day again today, which is amazing. I don't think I ever have such a chilled bank holiday. So the plan is just to go to work in the afternoon, do some teaching. So this morning I need to ride and I can't decide. I mean, I have enough chocolate. I don't need any more. However, anyone else like going to the supermarket the day after, after it's been closed for Easter? Because normally they reduce the eggs greatly. You know, there's no harm in stocking up on chocolate for the next few months. So I might do that. I need to get fuel as well. So I might not. I haven't quite decided. I obviously need to muck everyone out and sort them out and all that jazz. But it's a really interesting vlog for me. It's a kind of another, well, it's not kind of, it is another history vlog. But it very much involves my horses. Probably your horses, to be honest, as well. It's cool. I'm currently still hiding out in my car because it is bucketing it down out there. They said light rain on my weather app. It's not light rain. It's pouring down. The roads are very wet as well. I did pop to the supermarket. Somebody up above felt I didn't need any more chocolate because none of the Easter eggs were reduced. How was that? Nothing. There wasn't a huge amount left, to be honest, but yeah, nothing reduced. So didn't get any chocolate, which is a good thing. I don't need any more. Did get fresh bread though, and it's still warm. Is there anything better than fresh bread? And then I got a bag. I've got some fruit because obviously got to balance out the chocolate I'm consuming. And then a couple of like nice little treaty things, some soup and some stuff for lunches this week. So yeah, it was good. I don't need any more chocolate. So it's a good thing really that none of it was reduced. And then I just popped to the fuel station. So that's good. So the car's filled up for this week now. So I don't have to do that tomorrow when I'm kind of back to normal work. So yeah, now I've just got to venture outside and plan on going for a ride in this manky weather. Maybe it'll clear in a minute, we'll see. I don't want to get wet. As I mentioned, this is actually a history vlog, even though I started it off as like everyday life. And I was reading a breeding book back from the early 1900s just to see if anything popped out that I wanted to vlog about. And it was really interesting. I'm going to talk about lots of the facts from it as we go through this video. But there I was reading about it, and I had really no idea how much horses were kind of, how their breeding was recorded, when that all started, and I had no idea really. I obviously know that horses have been around for a very, very, very long time, but I didn't really know how we've got to kind of where we are now. And it very much talked about three very important horses that really started off the kind of incredible breeding that we have in this country. So it was three stallions, all Arabian stallions. The Burly Turk, which was 1689, the Darley Arabian, which was 1705, and it was the Godolphin Arabian, 1724. Now, I have definitely heard of Darley, and I've definitely heard of Godolphin. And these three horses that were brought over are really the foundations of our breeding in the UK. And interestingly, I did a bit of research because if you go onto this, I think it's called the Sport Horse Database, you can research your horse's pedigree, family tree and all that. And you wouldn't think, looking at Sienna is a proper typical European warm blood. You stoppy boo. You know, a lot of foreign blood in her, all warm blood, certainly warm blood for the the last few probably 100 years. And then you look at Artie, who is like, Artie, come here. Why are you hiding at the back? Don't look at his rug too closely. Then we've got Art, who is like typical Irish draft. He's heavy. You wouldn't believe that he has thoroughbred in him, but he does a little bit. I don't know where it's gone. But I mean, he mainly looks like a pure Irish draft. And then you've got Corporal, who again is another sort of European warm blood, but I think quite different. I think Coop and Sienna are quite different to look at. She's a lot heavier than he is. And just her body structure is quite different to Coop's. I'm not going to go around because it's pouring with rain and he's out the back. So I started researching all their kind of family tree and their bloodlines and all that. And interestingly, all of my horses are in fact related. And I don't know why that blew my mind, but it did, because I was thinking, you know, how can this be related to this spastic creature that could be related to this chap. All three of them are related. Anyway, I'm going to take this story inside because it's a bit wet and manky out here, isn't it? And I actually do need to get on and give you guys some more haylage, and take you in on how I sort of talk about the early days of breeding. I know I say this all the time, but it's really interesting. And the likelihood is that all our horses are probably related because they've all had to start off somewhere. And the likelihood is that they started off from these three very important Arabian stallions. So yeah. Evening, guys. I am tucked up inside. It is filthy weather out there tonight. I don't know what is going on, but it is pouring down with rain. It's really windy. It's been a horrible day. I'm obviously continuing this video from the other day when I was outside chatting about the fact that all three of my horses are in fact related. I'm most likely related to your horses too. So unless you've got some Suffolk Punch or a Shire horse or a Mountain and Moorland type pony, then the likelihood is that your horses will be related to mine too, but just you have to go back quite a few years. And I found this wonderful book that spoke about breeding over the last hundreds of years, in fact as far back as Henry VIII era. And I think it was published in 1903, and just had some really wonderful facts that I think, and I'm going to say this word so many times through this vlog, that were really interesting. So I'll get started with it. So as far back as Henry VIII's era, and this is something I kind of never realised, they were very conscious about breeding good quality horses because there was actually a shortage of horses back then. And so they wanted to breed better, stronger, healthier horses. So they actually put an act through that meant that any stallions that were over the age of 2 and under 15 hands were not allowed to go out on any common ground or wasteland, because literally they didn't want any accidents happening of breeding horses that were going to be too small for the job. So that was interesting. And also another act that came out was that any kind of ill-bred mares that weren't of good quality or weren't very well, or produced foals that weren't very well, were actually ordered to be destroyed. Again, trying to produce good quality horses. And it's not that we destroy horses nowadays in that way, but you know, we try to breed from good mares and good stallions so we produce good stock. And it's often why people will say to you, you know, you don't want to breed from a mare that broke at 6 and has all sorts of conformation faults. You know, however much you want to breed from your favourite mare, you know, you've got to try and breed the best you can. It also find people that turned out horses that had contagious infectious diseases. You know, they really were trying to produce and breed good quality horses. But the horse supply really was not very good back then. And you remember, these horses were obviously vital to people back then because it's transport, it's how they got to and from places. But you could also remember back in Henry VIII's era, there was a lot of battles. So a lot of horses were needed to carry the soldiers. So it was a serious problem. The first clear account of a Eastern pedigree horse being brought over to the UK, most likely an Arab, was in the reign of James I, which is 1603 to 1625. And a London merchant imported an Arab stallion which was sold to the king for £150. And don't quote me on this because I'm not entirely sure if I've worked this out right, but I think that works out to £17,000 in today's money. Charles II imported 4 barb mares. Now, I never knew what a barb mare was until I started researching this. And supposedly it is a North African like riding horse, and it's very like a thoroughbred but smaller. So they're around 15 hands, very agile, very fast, great stamina, really hardy types. And they were brought over from Tangiers, and they appear in the stud book as royal mares. And this really is where breeding started to be documented and also taken far more seriously, because they really were trying to improve the quality of horses. So these mares were crossed with horses that belonged to the Duke of Buckingham, and that was Fairfax's Morocco Barb and Hemsley Turk, and this laid the foundations of English Thoroughbred. And their produce was the only thing used for quite some years, because obviously they were trying to breed just from the best. And it wasn't until nearly the end of the 17th century, with the exception of 3 mares that were known as the Hamburg mares, and they were taken at the Siege of Vienna and sent to England in 1684. A few years on, 3 notable stallions were imported, which had a huge impact on English bloodstock. And these really are the stallions that truly started the foundations for really our horses to this day. And that was the Burly Turk, which was 1689. And this horse was ridden by his owner at the Battle of Boyne. I'm not sure I've said that right, but we're going to go with it. Which afterwards he was then put up at stud. So this horse survived the battle and then was brought back and put at stud. I mean, at least you know he's hardy and strong and tough. The Dali Arabian, which was 1705, and supposedly this was the most beautiful horse ever imported, probably the purest desert Arab. So, you know, he must have been something special. And then the Godolphin Arabian, which was 1724. Now, this horse was supposedly an Arab. However, some people say it was in fact a Barb. But who knows if that's true or not. And this horse has quite a lot of history. So again, supposedly, he was presented by the Emperor of Morocco to Louis XIV. He was valued so little by the monarch that he was downgraded to the shafts of Paris as a water cart horse. And that really is as it sounds. It's a horse that pulls a cart that carries water. And he was cruelly overworked by his proprietor, but watched over by his very faithful attendant, which was his groom. And he was actually rescued and brought to the UK. But even when he was brought to the UK, he was still undervalued. People didn't really think he was that special, so he wasn't even stood at stud. But one day, this rather clever little stallion decided to jump out of his field and find his own mare. And because of that, whatever they produced was so spectacular that he was then used at stud and turned out to be a huge influence in English Thoroughbred stock. So what a clever little horse. So those three stallions really are the foundations of British Thoroughbreds, but also our own sports horses. So obviously I decided to look at Artie's breeding first to see if I could find any of these famous stallions or mares in his bloodlines. And because he's Irish, I knew he'd have thoroughbred in him, and I thought he's the most British horse I've got compared to the other two, which are definitely more foreign blood. And so I started looking back. I went on to, I think it's called the Sport Horse Database, and I started looking back through his family tree, and sure enough, he had in his breeding right back Kerwin's Bay Barb, and this was a mare that was born in 1686 in Morocco and then imported to the UK. But even more exciting, I found the Burley Turk, which obviously is one of the famous stallions, also in his breeding. And I did not check every line of his family tree, so it's quite possible that he's also got the other stallions in there too. But then it got me thinking, because I think I was a bit naive about breeding. And the other two of my horses have got obviously much more foreign blood in them. But of course, all those warm bloods started off somewhere, and that is with thoroughbred blood in them. So sure enough, Corporal and Sienna's family tree also traces back to these famous stallions and Barb mares. So yeah, I'm most likely your horses are related to mine too. Because all our horses have to descend from somewhere, and it would have been from these three stallions. So it's really cool, it's so amazing really. So moving on to another interesting fact about this book is that it spoke about racing 2-year-olds. So even as far back as the early 1900s, it turns out they were questioning the fact that racing 2-year-olds might not be such a good idea. And I don't know why, but I somehow thought that perhaps back then they wouldn't have cared so much. And, you know, horses were treated so differently back then that I thought they wouldn't have given it a second thought, but they really were worried about it. They totally spoke about the fact that these horses were not really mature enough. Their bodies were not, you know, they're not fully grown at 2. So that was something I wasn't expecting to read. And they spoke about the pressure it put on the horses racing at that age. One of the interesting things and that I love about this book is the writer talking about the fact that there's, you know, motor cars starting to come on the scene. So this book was obviously published in the early 1900s, and motor cars, they didn't really start to come into play till 1910, but, you know, there may have been a couple around, and there would have obviously been a lot of talk about the fact that this kind of fast motorised machine was coming around, and that, you know, horsepower would not be needed so much, and you weren't going to have London streets full of horses. And he really dislikes this. Like, he really obviously loved horses, because he talks very much about the fact that he kind of hopes that people will get bored with the motor power and that they'll want to go back to horsepower. And he puts travelling at extremely high rates of speed in a smelly car amid clouds of choking dust and self-created whirlwind with necessities of Arctic outfits may conceivably lose its charm and cause a reversion to the pleasanter modes of our ancestors, who were quite reasonably content with a slower pace, which was not incompatible with enjoyment of the surrounding scenery. So, you know, he was obviously a fan of the horse and cart, for sure, and not a fan of the motorised car that was producing lots of smoke and dust and would make you freezing cold and all that. I just loved that. I just loved that he was so enthusiastic about horse transport over motorised car. But, you know, how wrong he was, I'm afraid, because obviously the motor car took off. So interesting, they talk a little bit about what they want a broodmare to look like, how their conformation should be. So supposedly they should be long. They should be low on short legs, standing perfectly straight on her 4 feet, and be called rooming. So she should have plenty of space in there for a baby, and plenty of width across her. Continuing on the broodmare front, it was actually really common for mares to keep working even though they were pregnant. So as long as it wasn't seriously hard work or fast-paced work, they would say it was perfectly fine for your mare to keep working literally up to a couple of days before she gave birth, which you don't really see of nowadays. I mean, you're lucky if you see a few people riding mares when they're pregnant, but most of the time, most mares are just chucked out in the field and left to kind of chill and grow a rather large stomach. So I'm going to finish the vlog there. I hope you've enjoyed it. I think it's pretty cool looking back at breeding. One of the biggest things for me is the fact that it's not really changed that much. You know, it's all about breeding good quality horses, not breeding from the rubbish. And the fact that these, 3 stallions and these barbed mares were really the foundations to English Thoroughbreds, and also the foundation to many of our horses to this day, I think is really very cool. So I hope you've enjoyed it.